Next up, we are going to hear more about how Convergent TV actually works in practice. So don't run away. Stay seated, guys. Next up, we are... and by the way, this next session is brought to you by Tatari. So please join me in welcoming to the stage AdExchanger Senior Editor, Anthony Vargas, and Mike Fogarty, Head of Client Development, Brand and Agency Partnerships.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us at Convergent TV World. I'm here with Mike Fogarty from Tatari. He's their Head of Client Development, Brand and Agency Partnerships. Some of you in the crowd might know him better as Fogs. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about what Convergent TV actually looks like in practice and how that's kind of evolving. So folks, when it comes to how we think about Convergent TV, what's actually changed operationally in the last 12 months, and how are we kind of seeing legacy and digital platforms converging?
Yes, I think there's two critical points that I think, one, we can of course recognize is the ongoing change in viewership, which is quite rapid between streaming and linear. I think the lines are very much beginning to blur, and it's becoming more complex. So I ask you, were the Christmas Day games on Netflix linear streaming? When you're watching the World Series on Hulu, is that linear streaming? How do you define YouTube? The answer isn't so simple, and the answer is they're basically both. And I think that's the type of complexity that we're starting to deal with. And in a way, the technologies are responding to this rapid shift, and that's why you're seeing kind of both ends of the spectrum, both traditional technologies and more DSP, digital-like technologies, come to the center of streaming at a very rapid pace. And even for us, one thing we're seeing more is those digital technologies are actually trying to build in linear infrastructure. In many cases, they might be outsourcing it to third-party agencies, but if anything, this validates that level of complexity that we're experiencing. And because of all this fragmentation, it's definitely changing our planning cycles as well.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think we're all kind of familiar with just the experience of kind of watching across different devices and just anecdotally, I'll share a little bit of my own kind of deal. So I'm a big Mets fan. When the Mets are in season, I'll be watching, I'll watch the game on the TV. But then sometimes I'll be playing video games on my TV. So I'll watch the Mets on my desktop computer using the MLB .TV desktop site. But then I'll go out on my patio to grill up some burgers for dinner, and I'll be watching the game on my phone, streaming from there. And it's all over the course of one game. So when we think about this fragmentation across devices in the TV space, how does that really kind of change the approach for marketers when it comes to not only their buying strategies, but then also, from an operational standpoint?
Yeah, so I'd touch on kind of two things. One, it's definitely compressing planning cycles. So I think we're already seeing changes at the upfront, definitely more dynamic. Marketers want more fungible nature to their budgets. So we're moving from kind of calendar broadcast kind of endeavors to more week-to-week, month-to-month, day-to-day cycles. But that's also predicated on performance expectations. I think we are definitely moving beyond the GRP of reach and frequency, and we are certainly in the era of performance outcomes. And so because of that level of expectations and accountability, that's part of that driving force there. And I think in the end, the future of tooling is going to stitch this all together in a way that you have operational fluidity across this type of convergence that allow marketers to buy, plan, measure, and optimize at different scale. And so for us, we believe at Tatari that Convergent TV, it's a decisioning system. It's not a media label, which I think is important.
And how does taking a more convergent approach help with the attribution piece too? Because it's like I was kind of describing, you're seeing people watch across all these different touch points. All those kind of different touch points have their own sort of ad experiences. They're serving their own ads. They're different creative across the different platforms, different advertisers. How does being able to bring all that together within one platform help you actually prove which ones are driving performance?
I think the key here, to use Lord of the Rings, there's not one ring to rule them all. And that's the attribution models, right? I think kind of a multimodal perspective is important. So for example, we look at dynamic incrementality on linear, where we might be looking at different perspectives on streaming and how those kind of co-align together. But being able to tag them in a deduplicated way definitely has an advantage versus if they're fragmented and disparate and you're looking at different systems. I think that's when you can have a little bit over attribution problems, too much liberal counting, those different types of things. But I do think linear and streaming should be treated separately and not having the same model.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know, when we were kind of going over what we were going to talk about on the prep call, you brought up this idea about Convergent TV becoming more like a decisioning system rather than just like a label for like a media channel.
Yep.
Can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Like, what do you really mean by like a decisioning system?
Yeah, I think the key phrase I said earlier is that I think you need to have operational fluidity to decide and make TV iterative and continuous in how you optimize and plan, because they're very much not static cycles anymore. Yes, again, there are moments where you might book out in advance, like you want to buy into the Oscars or something like the Super Bowl we're going to touch on momentarily. You know, those things definitely are booked out in advance, but generally speaking, in the performance television markets, and I think the world we're moving towards, it's an always-on ecosystem. The way that you're leveraging machine learning and the agentic era, it's changing quite rapidly, and it's better for the space.
And then, yeah, speaking of the Super Bowl, Tatari recently worked with 4 first-time Super Bowl advertisers that also run always-on campaigns through your platform. So what did these advertisers do differently for their first Super Bowl activations versus what they usually do for their always-on campaigns?
Yeah, it was a great moment for Tatari and our partners. We're definitely not a stranger to the Super Bowl. We placed a couple brands there before, but this is our biggest year yet, having 4 first-time partners. So I want to give a shout out to Manscaped, Row, Life 360, and Tecovas for having an incredible Super Bowl and a lot of fun creative. But the takeaway for them is that all of their TV journeys were incredibly unique. And it's a very judicious and deliberate process on how they got to this moment. They didn't just wake up and decide to go for the swing and commit $18 million to get the biggest tentpole moment of the year. Yep. It was a process and a journey. And so a lot of those partners started in the linear DR space, so taking advantage of efficient CPMs, starting to build some benchmarking and starting to ask themselves, what does good look like? And then you start to move to scale and streaming and things start to balloon up. And so when they're able to look at the economics and the calculus there, you know, they felt that it was the right time to hedge a bet to get to that largest moment in the screen and using it as a scaling moment for them. The other thing I would say is, you know, some of them actually took a convergent approach, if we're going to talk about the decisioning agility, where some actually maximized reach by doing both broadcast and streaming, whereas others went in the streaming-only route because it's far more economically friendly, around $10 million to get into the Super Bowl versus 18 at max scale. And so, yeah, they were, like I said, quite diligent in the way that they approached it. And also, I would say their post-media decisioning from retargeting, supporting it in other channels. But yeah, it was an incredible year for them and definitely proud of the partners that executed. Anything that stood out to you in terms of like the more like convergent type like approaches for the Super Bowl? Like, you know, maybe, you know, doubling down on like, you know, what you were doing on what one of the brands was doing on linear with like some additional exposure on streaming or, you know, just like that kind of cross-platform convergent play. Yeah, 100%. I think they all had kind of their kind of pre, mid, and kind of post-decisioning kind of integrated plans together and supporting those channels. The other thing I would say is that they recognize that the only way to get into that type of moment is on a direct-to-network relationship. A theme we're going to touch on a bit today is that a lot of these coveted seasonal moments are very protected by the networks directly. And so all of these partners had their DSPs of record, but they recognized they couldn't get into this moment with that. We are definitely quite a ways off from dynamic ad insertion at the Super Bowl, where every house in the street is going to see a different ad. I believe that future is coming and will come, but we're definitely not quite there yet on the infrastructure. And so, you know, part of how they thought about that decisioning system was recognizing that they have to be direct through Tatari in certain elements, but they also have outside controls for omnichannel execution too. And then, you know, what was there anything that like the brands like, you know, felt very particularly like strong about that they want to like kind of carry forward in their convergent TV strategies? I would say what they recognized was, I mean, obviously it's the Super Bowl, so there's a bit of a caveat here, but the level of causality and what we call spike analysis at Tatari that they recognized, the way that they felt this on their websites, their digital D2C locations, any brick and mortar locations in certain cases, they could feel that, and it definitely gave them some strong intelligence and learnings on how to adopt to creative. Do they want to participate in other high impact moments, and is there a cost kind of trade-off, opportunity cost value there? And so I think that they took a lot away from that for sure. And yeah, so, you know, we've talked a bit about how like brands are adapting to this new world of convergent TV, but where do you see like existing advertising workflows struggle to adapt? And would you say this is more of a problem on the direct side or on the programmatic side? I love this question. I think because of the rapid change in viewership, I think marketers moved faster than actually the traditional pipes could keep up. And so I think there was still a lot of antiquated operational rails and burdens on the way that we were planning, but because the market was moving so quickly, they had to adapt. And this is gonna be polarizing, what I'm about to say, and some of you might not like this, but I think we overcorrected to programmatic, and I'm gonna add some context there. So if we think about what programmatic means for most of these marketers today, they serve an incredible purpose. They're omni-channel, they allow you to aggregate inventory, bring data addressability, and they make it easy. And the easy part is where we overcorrected, right? DSPs added device type to CTVs, they have off-the-shelf curated deals. So all of these brands were able to get on there with ease. The problem is that programmatic is still such a small part of the overarching nature of the television business in the United States. So in a way, they have a material blind spot. And I think unbeknownst to most marketers, they generally don't understand this fundamental. So if I take a step back, the market's about $70 billion between linear and streaming, $90 billion if you add in local linear. But if we concentrate on the streaming side of $30 billion, a significant portion of that is still, again, a direct to network negotiated transaction, whether that's the upfront or the spot market, it's still quite significant. And so what I would say to that is the smart marketers and some of the ones that we mentioned, they're establishing hybrid playbooks. So they recognize you have to be in a DSP and you should be buying programmatically. You should be owning direct level access to network relationships for cost efficiencies and moments. And the 1 + 1 = 3 equation takes hold there. I think they're driving more surplus and growth when they're buying from both ends of the spectrum. To be blunt, there are pros and cons to programmatic and direct on both sides, and so it becomes a balance. But the way that I think of the world is that think of direct for, again, those moments, those high impact capabilities, and then you anchor programmatic for that downstream frequency management, that level of addressability, and you can definitely play them off of each other. But I started this response by saying the market was moving faster than the traditional pipes could keep up, but I think we are now at an inflection point where that is actually changing, where you are seeing the executables actually begin to innovate in such a way where the convergent TV technology is becoming this ecosystem of what I'm calling unified decisioning between both in a singular way, in a single platform.
And yeah, when we think about like the programmatic piece, like you kind of alluded to, brands can't do everything they want to do from a convergent TV play through their existing DSP partners. In a lot of cases, you do have to go direct to platform. But, at the same time, I know DSPs want to be that kind of full service offering eventually. So what do you kind of think DSPs in particular have to change, or how do they have to kind of evolve to meet this convergent TV moment? What's kind of lacking there?
Yeah, I think the first thing is certainly the fidelity of the technical integration itself and the plumbing, which I'll touch on in a sec. But it's also, we widely accepted, I think, as an industry that we are moving beyond the vanity of the impression to a performance outcome mindset, and that's helped driving some of the structural change. So if we look in programmatic, the inception of SPO, or supply path optimization, it's been around for a while, and it really started with header bidding, but in the realm of TV, DSPs are approaching it from server-to-server integrations so they can create more of those unified auctions, and it does get rid of intermediaries. It makes the CPMs a little bit more cost efficient. There is definitely faster feedback loops, and so programmatic is definitely starting to evolve. But the way that those technical integrations work, in the end, they're still programmatic, which means there's still a level of auction environment. So there's still some burden and friction and kind of complexity involved there in the way that they integrate. But I think the market still wants us to get a step closer because, again, the market was so used to working with networks directly ages ago in the realm of television. So they have that level of expectations, and that's what they want from the technology layers that they're integrating with. And so, I believe that next step of that world is getting a little bit closer. And so, candidly, for us at Tatari, you may have heard about it. We actually announced our upstream supply side technology last week, and that is a direct ad tag, direct integration into the ad server of the network that actually brings all the benefits of all the programmatic operations of speed, scale, and conciseness, but without the auction. So really what that means is you're automating orders. That's great for publishers and the buyers because there's less manual trafficking. You're no longer in ad ops manual sheets in Excel and Google. That completely goes away. Your campaigns launch faster. You're moving much quicker. You're mitigating human errors, which quite frankly, unfortunately, still happen with manual emails on IOs.
Definitely.
Even errors when you're negotiating a PMP or a PG deal and the alphanumeric number was wrong. And then you wake up the next day and there's no scale. And so, again, I believe that this future is this level of decisioning ecosystem where you have that level of direct fidelity, but again, you're applying both the best of programmatic, but the fidelity of direct.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned DSPs are looking to do more like server-to-server kind of connections. What would you say kind of has to change, in the sense of automation at the ad server level?
I mean, this is probably more of a difficult problem for the networks because obviously they all have their own yield and waterfalls. And so naturally, what programmatic enabled was the ability for buyers coming from the DSPs with that first mindset to participate in a direct level so they are able to have more universal buying access. I think the challenge is because of the auction nature of programmatic, even if you're going for a premium opportunity, you're likely still paying $40, $50, $60 CPMs through programmatic to get a lick at that opportunity versus that same transaction direct could easily be $20 or $30. I would argue same fidelity, same household level performance, but there's, again, an opportunity cost trade-off there in terms of how you want to consolidate, how you want to see it. And so I think they have to essentially evolve with the networks, the nature of how they want to integrate, but there is somewhat, to be fair, a question on the network side too, because they need to begin to prioritize programmatic more as well in the waterfall.
And then, you mentioned before, like, things are just moving more in like a outcomes and performance focused direction in this TV market more broadly. So how do you kind of see marketers like moving past like those those vanity metrics that everybody likes to hate on and like getting more into like drilling down on like what's really driving performance and outcomes?
Yeah, and I might be being a little harsh up here on reach and frequency. In the end, reach and frequency is an outcome. It is a path to a legitimate outcome downstream. So obviously it has its merits, right? Obviously we still care about scale and reach in certain moments. I think partially what happened is because of the nature of being in DSPs and it being targetable and addressable, we had this forcing nature to compare it to social economics, right? So you want to compare your CAC and your LTV to TikTok and to Instagram and to YouTube and all these different environments. And I actually also find that as a little bit of a mistake. I actually think we have to recognize that CTV and connected, it is television, it is the glass. And in some way we have to treat it as such that, yes, you can measure it like digital to some extent, but it also has a halo effect that drives downstream impact and other adjacent media angles. And so I think we are waking up to that a little bit, but I think there's a little bit of too much scrutiny right now that we want connected TV to perform like social, but I just think that's the wrong frame of reference. But partially with the DSPs and even direct, right? We're in the world of alternative currencies beyond Nielsen, from audience attention metrics, from iSpot and VideoAmp and ComScore, Adelaide on the attention side, plenty of in between that are happening. And so, with that realm also being in flux, I think everyone is trying to just hedge their bets on, okay, what's the currency of record? What's the measurement model? Or is it design experiments, incrementality? How do they want to focus on the glass? There is no one answer, to be clear. I think it's very specific to the marketer and the brand.
And we already touched on the SPO trend a little bit on like the DSP side, but like, we're also seeing a lot of like SSPs also really like aggressive with like, you could call it SPO. Sometimes you hear DPO instead. And there, especially like on the SSP side, this is very focused on like the TV market, where like they're doing these kind of like direct to buyer deals specifically for TV.
Sure.
So like, how are you kind of seeing? What else are you kind of seeing when it comes to SPO? Maybe on the sell side, how is that affecting how marketers have to think about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change on SPO in general is consolidation in the intermediaries. I think both marketers and the DSPs themselves are definitely already in rapid consolidation. For the for the DSP, it's actually quite expensive. The more SSP connections you have, a thing called QPS or queries per second, it's expensive to listen to all these duplicated bid requests coming in. And they are starting to get smart and intelligent to realize, oh, these are duplicates, or I can go from 8 to 10 integrations to 3 to 5 integrations. And the marketers are doing the exact same thing. And in a way, they're also able to take their marketing tonnage and get rate of change because they can get better rates at the SSPs now that they're consolidating and giving those volume kind of based commitments. So I think that's also the other side of SPO here, right? We are definitely seeing the reduction in between of intermediaries. We talked about things like upstream or things like server to servers on programmatic. The sell side also has their own offerings as well, right? And whether that's Magnite Clearline or Programmatic Activator, things in between. Everyone's innovating. I think everyone's recognizing the trend. We need to get closer to the end game, and in this case, we're talking the TV networks.
And if TV should be this kind of like continually optimized kind of channel where you're thinking more about convergence across like different platforms, how do you see? How would you say agencies should adapt?
I'm honestly really excited to see this continuous kind of innovation from the agencies, including our partners. I think that they've definitely recognized that they have to move from a principal media buying model and an FTE labor ecosystem to one that's more based on this kind of continuous signal and performance. In many ways, the way I see it is they're not agencies of record, they're algorithms of record. They are indeed becoming their own operating systems because agencies sit on an immense amount of talent, institutional knowledge, data stacks, partner data. And so those that can recognize machine learning capabilities, leaning into this automation of the agentic era, it kind of recenters them on strategy and what do they do best? Well, what do they do best? Creative development, audience persona development, design experiments. They think about integrated cross-planning and measurement ecosystems. And the more time that our technologies can give the agencies back, the more they're going to thrive. I do not believe that this is going to replace agencies. I think it's only going to elevate their role.
Mm-hmm. And then as a last kind of thought, like in 3 years, what part of today's TV buying ecosystem do you think will feel obsolete?
So I thought about how to answer this one today. I think we've touched on a couple themes, right? We've touched on the changing upfronts. We definitely recognize the manual nature of order management is changing. We're moving to this performance mindset. But I'm going to actually ask for a PSA from this room. It's something I'm very passionate about. But I think what is going to become obsolete is we have to stop the obsession with pinning linear versus streaming. We are too obsessed with the Nielsen gauge. Quite frankly, I find it a distraction and a disservice. In the end, it's sight, sound, emotion, it's television. Television still today, from 40, 50 years ago, is still an impactful channel to clients and brands' growth, and we need to treat it as such. And I think that what in particular is becoming obsolete is the operational challenges between the two because of the innovation of Convergent TV and the infrastructure, the fluidity, the decisioning. And so even if you're taking a 20-year veteran of traditional buying, they can take that institutional knowledge and bring that into this tooling and educate the tooling to how they can drive impact. So in closing, again, I no longer believe that TV should be about linear versus streaming. It's responsiveness.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway for sure. So yeah, Mike, or AKA Fogs, thanks a ton for your insight here. Really awesome conversation. Up next, we've got a networking break, so get schmoozing out there, and we'll see you out there.